have to keep looking at the title of this video because I know that in previous videos I have rather wandered off the topic. Obviously, we're not all Russians and we can't we have to wonder it ourselves if we are in Western nations who are members of NATO, what we think we are doing. Being grimly satisfied at what Russia is doing, at least those of us who are not surprised that Russia would do what it is doing now, which is to sort out the problem of Ukraine once and for all. It's been putting up with it for so long. What is my take, Connop? What's so bizarre about it? Why are you pretending you're on the side of NATO? You're European. You're going to be faced with higher energy costs. So why would you support European nations behaving like America's poodles barking at the Russian bear when their national interests would entail trading peacefully and profitably with Russia? It makes no sense, but I know you will be towing the official line, whatever it is, and you think you are cleverer than people who speak the truth. So what I'm talking about here today is what somebody who considers himself a nationalist ought to do. Why is there this, apparent self-loathing among so many Westerners who obviously don't side with the policy of America, who but the tamest lame brains are cheering the aggressive policy of NATO towards Russia? They must be either ignorant or mendacious. I think this is a good opportunity for us to explain what being a nationalist means, and I have repeatedly stated my definition of nationalism, which is government in the national interest. Now, I know that comes up against a few problems because people will say, well, what is in the national interest? Look at these nationalists in the Second World War. They were called Hitler and they were called Mussolini, and they did what they thought was in the national interest, and look what happened to them. So my position on this is that we need, as individuals and nations, a moral system that we subscribe to for our own preservation, for our own protection. And obviously, I'm talking about religion. I'm not talking about some secular political ideology that arose from the ideas of the French Revolution that had no original author, because what communism has over liberalism is that it actually has an author, and the author was Karl Marx, who wrote the Communist Manifesto. So if you really want to get to the nitty-gritty of communism, there's always a book with an actual author that you can go back to. But if you want liberalism, it's nothing but what Western governments have been doing for about 250 years. And what Western governments seem to be expecting its citizens to do is to worship their history, whatever they did, and say, this is Western, this is the best. And obviously it isn't, because not all Western foreign policy, not all social and economic foreign policy is right. And so the only test for the viability of any moral system must be how long it has lasted. It's not about even going to war or not going to war, but really about the reasons which allow us to go to war, and reasons that make us reject both those reasons for going to war. So people in a war situation will find it, well, difficult to criticize the government, because one would predictably be accused of disloyalty and being unpatriotic, and the usual accusations that would be hurled at one in times of national distress. So those who want to identify themselves as principled nationalists must understand what principles they are upholding. And I'm saying, really, you can only choose a moral system that supports tribal and national identity, and specifically states it from the highest authority. And I'm afraid there is only one book that does all these things. There is nothing else. Well, you can have Mein Kampf, Hitler saying we must take this and we must do that, but then he's dead, and so is Mussolini, and so is Marx. But Marx has the advantage of saying that I have a philosophy, and it is dialectical materialism, and I predict that one day we will get to a workers' heaven through the process of dialectical materialism. And dialectical materialism has the advantage of being a truism. And so this statement of truism will keep hope alive in the breasts of Marxists. And we know Marxists come out of the woodwork when everyone is feeling poor. And I'm saying it's time to abandon all these tried and failed ideologies and adopt this thing that we have so far never tried in the West. Because there is no reason not to do so. And it also has a good track record, considering that it's been around since the 7th century. And it's something that, well, we really haven't tried. And the advantage of following Quranic principles is that it is holistic. It has social policy, economic policy, and particularly relevant today, foreign policy. And as we all know, foreign policy is about international relations, and of course it means whether to go to war or not, and under what circumstances it is to be allowed. I see that Conops wants to come on. And he's welcome to do so. Excuse me a moment while I blow my nose. Well, has he gone? Is he not coming on after all? What, so you're not coming on because it's StreamYards? There's always a problem with you, isn't there? If it's not one thing, it's another. Well, I'll just try and finish what I was going to say about the correct position of nationalists to take. So we should see this as an opportunity to promote nationalism and say, look, we can understand that Russia is looking after its own interests. There is no national interest at all in European nations being the poodles of America, rattling their sabers at Russia, and it makes no sense at all. And the only people it benefits would be the arms manufacturers. And of course, arms manufacturers don't really care about the national interest. All they care about is their profits. And of course, wars would enhance their profits. And not all of us are shareholders in arms manufacturers. So the interests of the armaments industry is not the same as a national interest. And NATO, I'm afraid, is just I don't know, just a market for the defense industries. And, there is no purpose to NATO because, I mean, do we really think that the Russians want to invade us? And if they're not going to invade us, what is the point of NATO? We already know that NATO has been used in really quite unconscionable ways. It has been used as an excuse to invade Iraq and invade Libya, and it hasn't exactly been to the benefit of ordinary European citizens. And the long and short of it is nobody is happy with Western foreign policy, certainly not Westerners. And those of us who want to make a point about this should, discuss what is a national interest and question whether being mean to Russia as a European nation serves the national interest of the country we are in, where we are already suffering rising prices and we will have worse to come. And it's not just individuals, but companies that need, factories, if we still have any factories. And really, we are allowing interests that are not the national interests to dictate to our politicians what they do. It seems that our politicians do not in any way care about the national interest. And this would explain why Putin is so popular in non-Russian countries. They see somebody they would like themselves representing their country, leading their country, but they are stuck with people like Schultz and Macron and Boris Johnson and people they know won't be there for very long because we know the nature and tenure of democratically elected politicians in the West. They don't last long. Ralph is very welcome to define nationalism in his own way. Why doesn't he do that? So, my suggestion is that if you care about having government in the national interest, this is what you should be discussing in real life with people that you know. And this is, of course, the ideal opportunity because we're allowed to talk about Ukraine and Russia and Putin and what we think he is trying to do and what our politicians think they are trying to do. And mention neoconservatism, neoliberalism, democracy, and whether it's a viable political system that will take us into the future. So, this is just something for us to consider if we want to be politically active and focused in what we think and say and do. It's a shame that Connops couldn't make it after all.